facility here is a conservation hatchery, and it's operated under the umbrella of the Ocean Resources Enhancement and Hatchery Program, which is quite a mouthful. We call it the ORHAP, so if you hear either of those. The ORHAP program came about in 1983 through legislation. Basically, you had a handful of recreational fishermen, it might have been more than a handful, came together and said, hey, there was some striped bass stocking going on, they knew about salmon stocking, they wanted to explore the feasibility of doing something more proactive than you can't fish here, you can only catch this many, and that sort of thing. So this program was born out of that. Early 80s, there's an advisory panel that advises the Department of Fish and Wildlife, made up mostly of user groups. And way back in the early 80s, they said, okay, what are we gonna raise and stock into the ocean? White sea bass was selected as #1. It's a super popular local species. It's not a sea bass, which is why the sea bass is spelled as one word. It's actually a cyanid or a croaker. So related to red drum, sea trout, those kinds of critters. It's the biggest one on the west coast here. It can range up to historically Alaska. You know, you find them up in the Bay Area now, down into Baja. There's an isolated population in Sea Cortez. So that's kind of the spin on that. Again, super popular, good eating, hard to catch, very patchy in distribution. And so that was #1. #2 was California halibut, which again, it's not a halibut, it's a flounder. So I don't know who, somebody was messing with us when they made these things years ago. It's related to summer flounder and southern flounder. It's a Paralichthys. And so somebody called it a California halibut. I think it's the biggest of the Paralichthys, so maybe that was the rationale. But just so you don't get confused, it's not the Pacific halibut. And so those are 1, 2. Over time, the research on California halibut started to fall off because there just wasn't enough money to do both species concurrently. In terms of the production process, and again, you'll get to see that as we move through, but basically we have broodstock here that we spawn. They're collected from the wild, so it's a conservation program, so we're interested in genetic diversity, not selective breeding or anything like that. And then, so we have spawning populations here, collect the eggs, raise the fish up. Again, standard marine practices for the most part. The nuances we'll talk about during the tour. But get them to a point about 3 or 4 inches. We tag them, again, you'll see all that. And then there's a couple things unique about this program compared to the very few other marine finfish stocking programs in the country. One is it's intensive, so we don't have the luxury of having big ponds like they do in the southeast. Intensive rearing, and then we also raise them to a larger size using acclimation pens. And basically that's allowing us to grow a 3 or 4 inch up to a 8, 10, 12, 14 inch fish. Bigger, in theory being better, able to survive better in the wild, less predators. There's more cost and more risk associated with that, obviously. The net pens, we own and operate this one. There's 9 currently in operation up and down the coast, including out at Catalina Island. Most of those are owned and operated by volunteer groups. Again, fishing clubs or folks with an interest in giving back to the ocean. So we manage all that. Chad's here, that's his job to help coordinate that. So we give them the fish that are tagged, the food, and then we respond to problems that they might be having. So it's a lot. But it gets the community engaged in the whole process so they understand aquaculture, what it takes to grow these fish, the good, the bad, and all of that.
These sea bass are sensitive fish. We really want to minimize the amount of time that they've been handled or netted, and so we'll actually build a sluice system from our J2 system outside our Juvenile 2 system where we just worked, and we'll send them down into our holding tank. If you're not familiar with a sluice, think of like a water slide, just for sea bass, okay? So they'll come into our holding tank over here, and we have a sufficient amount. We'll actually load them in smaller batches into our recirculating tagging system over here.